Nations, Lincoln Center. Like Moses, who was the great master planner, Harrison was the great master builder, and he was great pals with Moses and with Nelson Rockefeller. And the first chapter really is about his house in Huntington, and he also taught at Yale occasionally, and he became very good friends with artists, you know, it was Leger, all kinds of people, and his house had this enormous Leger mural painting above the fireplace, and he used the house as a way to experiment. It was kind of a workshop, and for instance, if he was working on Lincoln Center, he would take a room and make it into an acoustical chamber, and he spent, I found out that, and it's still there, he used a potato shed in the summers as his summer, there's no air conditioning then, for his summer studio, and, you know, crowds of young architects would live on the property doing drawings for both World's Fairs there. So anyway, did that, and then Franklin Wright House, I'm not going to tell you about today, which people had touched on in a few books and always called it a middle-class Usonian. And a Usonian house was Franklin Wright's notion for an affordable, practical house. He actually, in his sort of theories, he didn't like cities. He really believed in suburbanization. And anyway, it's not that. It's a beautiful prairie house. And the house was owned and built by his publisher, the publisher for Horizon Press. Very interestingly enough, we found out went to jail, I think in '39, because he was supposedly a pornographer. What did he publish? He published books on children's sex education. The Catholic Church went after him. And he also published books like Lady Chatterley's Lover, books that are taken for granted now at Barnes & Noble. And a very interesting house. And then, just to go on, I'm going to talk a little bit about Boyer, Chapter 6, the architect of Whitney. Found something like 28 commissions of his on Long Island. And architectural historian friends of mine and people who've worked, they were stunned because Long Island got so rapidly developed that it's really, really, really difficult to do research here and to go and find buildings because the maps have changed, the traffic is totally awful, and this is the first summer that I've actually been able to be at our cottage in Amagansett for a month because most of the summers I was back and forth looking for treasure. So anyway, I'm very proud of an essay I did, number 20, on I.M. Pei and Roosevelt Field. I got to interview I.M. Pei. His first big job, and he went to MIT, went to Harvard, was to work for William Zeckendorf, the great developer, and he even owned the land that the United Nations was on. He was a huge figure in 20th century, mid-20th century Europe. They did this extraordinary shopping center, and I.M. Pei was put in complete charge. They went way over budget. Zeckendorf ended up going bankrupt a few years later. But it was the great mother of all. It was the second largest in '54 shopping center in the country. The other one was in Minneapolis. And Joseph Albers, who had been at the German Bauhaus School, the artist, was involved through various students of his with the graphic design. So I did a whole essay on that, and I need to hurry up, but I did the 2 state universities. That took me months because it's very difficult to research universities. Universities don't want people poking around because they don't want landmarking because they really feel that it's intrusive. And anyway, early Stony Brook was really quite wonderful and so forth. And then I ended with Richard Meyer, and I found 8 houses, and I feel his work hasn't really changed much from the houses that he built on Long Island as a very, very young man, where he experimented. And interestingly enough, I discovered that he was roommates as a young man with Frank Stella, the artist, who used lots and lots of color. And Meyer is known as Mr. White. Well, I've been in several of these houses on Long Island, and they're very colorful. Now, photograph of Gropius in old age, at the top of the stair wearing a white jacket with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other architects. And he changes American architecture forever. The reason Park Avenue looks the way it does today, with all those glass towers, has to do with the kind of education he promoted. promoted, and also that Mies van der Rohe promoted in Chicago, where he went. And anyway, these young architects who had gone to Harvard and were his students said, we don't want you to retire. He was thinking of retiring and turning over the head of the school to somebody else, which ended up to be CERT. Let's start a practice. So in the mid-40s, actually, he didn't retire until 53. They started a firm. It's called the Architects Collaborative. They did a huge amount around the world. It was called TAC. And Ben Thompson, who is to the right of Gropius, he actually did not have a degree in architecture. He studied it at Yale. So a lot of people working for these firms did not even, some of them, have their official papers. But that's not so relevant. What's relevant is Ben Thompson went on to start a firm called Design Research, which was a shop actually in Cambridge that sold beautiful handcraft objects and Marimekko fabric, if that means anything to you, and introduced modern objects and Swedish modern furniture to the United States. And because also Gropius helped him. But anyway, there they are, and the firm did a huge amount of work around the world. They did embassies, ended up going bankrupt after the first oil crash, in the 70s, because they had a lot of work in the Arab world. But I found this house, which nobody knew about in architectural history. It's on Center Island, near Huntington. And it was for a woman named Mary Griggs, who ended up marrying Jackson Burke, who brought Helvetica type, which was used all over the subways eventually, to the United States. And this house was Ben Thompson, who I mentioned, had started the store, grew up, he's very well known in architecture. He grew up in, not Minneapolis, that other city, I'm losing it, St. Paul. And he came from a really well-to-do, grew up on the Grand Street and everything. And he was in New York after the war, and he bumped into his childhood friend, Mary Griggs, who was the heiress to one of the great, to the Livingston, her mother was a Livingston, the big family along the Hudson River from colonial times. But her father was in lumber, and they had one of the great Midwestern fortunes. And he was a single woman in the early 50s, and very brave for a woman of her time. She asked Ben Thompson and Gropius to help to design a house for her on land she had in Center Island on the grounds of a subdivided great estate. And my book is full of essays about architects who built, that's a theme, on these great estates that got subdivided, where they'd be subdivided, but there'd be beautiful landscape and specimen trees, often put in by the Olmsted firm, the firm who was associated with Central Park. But anyway, this house is built in 54, and it's a typical tack house of the time, a much more expensive job than usual, and there's sort of Japanese feel to these terraces going around, or so forth and so on. And I became fascinated by this house, and I kept it very quiet because I wanted it to be a surprise